The Special Air Service soldiers quietly invade the German airbase at Bagush, eliminating close guards with knives, planting plastic bombs in every aircraft nearby, then creeping out of the perimeter undetected. Minutes later, the towering figure of Paddy Mayne, the Irish lion, watched the fireworks from afar. The enemy base was on fire, but that wasn't enough for the Irish warrior, who remarked, "Damn, we only destroyed 40 aircraft. Some of the bloody primers must have been wet." Unsatisfied with the devastation he had just caused with only 3 SAS commandos, he sent them back to their heavily armed jeeps and warned them the job wasn't done yet. The commandos planned to destroy the entire base by charging into the perimeter, guns blazing. Such was the relentlessness of the Irish Lion Commando, which was unleashed on North Africa, creating a trail of carnage and paralyzing the Axis powers. This is the story of Robert Blair Maine, the soldier most feared by the Nazis. Robert Blair Paddy Mayne's story begins much like the opening scene of the first Gears of War game. The grizzled, jaded, muscular hero sits alone in a dark, rat-infested cell with no hope of escape, and his own violent angst to keep him company, when suddenly a light appears at the door, and an old friend shows up with a double-edged proposition: sit here and rot to death, or undertake a mission so dangerous and violent that death was all but assured, and the only way you're coming home is in a takeout box. Major Mayne, a 6'2", 200-pound British commando with a zest for violence rivaled only by his appetite for Guinness, found himself locked in a prison cell in Egypt awaiting a court-martial. Sure, he deserved to be in that jail. He had cold-cocked a superior officer and then chased the officer while swinging a bayonet like a sword and unleashing an epic stream of profanity. This wasn't the first time the soldier had found himself at odds with authority. Just a few months prior to the attempted stabbing of a superior, Mayne found himself on the wrong end of some subpar service from a bartender. Instead of merely withholding a tip, he took matters into his own hands, seizing the bartender by the throat. Amidst the bustling atmosphere of a crowded nightclub, he compelled the bartender to dance while firing his revolver into the ground around the man's feet. This incident, along with his current predicament, seemed poised to be the catalyst for Mayne's return to Northern Ireland, marked by a dishonorable discharge, a criminal record, and an undoubtedly substantial reservoir of pent-up anger. As Mayne contemplated his future, the bold and adventurous Colonel David Sterling appeared at his prison cell with an undeniably daring Dirty Dozen-style proposition. "I can arrange for the charges against you to be dropped, my old friend, but on one condition. You must agree to serve as my second-in-command in a perilous new covert unit I'm establishing. The mission, leading a small elite squad of battle-hardened soldiers on foot through the Sahara Desert, penetrating deep behind German lines, causing havoc, and hopefully returning to base before the enemy could mount a formidable defense. The unit, initially dubbed L Detachment, but now recognized as the renowned British Special Air Service. As one of the founding members of the SAS, Paddy Mayne's role was to lead swift-moving teams of demolition experts through the harsh Sahara terrain. They braved scorching 130-degree daytime temperatures and freezing nights, scaled 100-foot-high sand dunes, endured insects, sandstorms, flash floods, dehydration, and enough sand in their clothes to construct a formidable sandcastle. Their objective was to infiltrate the German-held airfields and engage with a superior enemy force without expectation of reinforcement or rescue. The task was immensely perilous. During the SA's inaugural mission, 6 teams of 10 men parachuted into a desert storm, with only a third of the men surviving. Mayne remained undeterred. As a former heavyweight boxing champion and renowned rugby player, he refused to yield, even after losing 40 of his 60 soldiers on that fateful mission. Recognizing the peril of skydiving into sandstorms, Mayne and Sterling altered their approach. They began utilizing open-top jeeps to traverse enemy lines, conducting nocturnal incursions on foot, sabotaging aircraft, then swiftly retreating to their vehicles and racing through the desert like rally drivers. As their tactics proved highly effective and enemy defenses intensified, the SAS augmented their jeeps with twin-linked Vickers machine guns, escalating their raids to even greater audacity. They thundered onto enemy airstrips in broad daylight, guns blazing, wreaking havoc on grounded planes before speeding away, leaving bewildered Axis ground crews in their wake, struggling to distinguish between tools and anatomy. When it came to displaying sheer desert combat prowess, the hard-drinking, hard-fighting Paddy Mayne was unparalleled. On one particular mission, he navigated through barbed wire, likely tearing it apart with his teeth to attack an airfield. He single-handedly neutralized 24 German fighter planes using thermite grenades, not to be confused with thermal detonators. Continuing his rampage, Mayne burst into the pilot's rec room and unleashed a hail of gunfire from his Tommy gun. He left nothing but lifeless bodies and abandoned meals strewn across the room. As he walked away from the carnage with an expressionless demeanor, Mayne stumbled upon an ME-109 that had miraculously escaped destruction. Without any more handheld explosives, the formidable Irishman casually approached the aircraft, ripping out the control panel with his bare hands before strutting into the desert. Remarkably, this account is not a fabrication, but a genuine historical episode. 1 week later, Mayne led his Jeep convoy to another airfield, personally dispatching an additional 27 fighters, tallying an impressive 51 aircraft kills in just 2 days of attacks. He had achieved such feats from the cockpit of a Spitfire Mark I. He would have been hailed as a fighter ace many times over. By the end of their campaign, the SAS had decimated over 100 enemy aircraft. After many months of conducting daring raids deep within enemy territory, Colonel Sterling was captured during an operation, prompting Paddy Mayne to assume command of the 1st SAS Regiment. This unit merged with the Special Boat Service to form the Special Raiding Squadron, with Mayne at its helm. Leading the SRS, Mayne embarked on a multitude of perilous missions, spearheading the Allied landings on Sicily and mainland Italy in 1943. During one raid, Mayne and his team stormed a beach, scaled a sheer cliff under the cover of night, assaulted an Italian coastal defense base, captured 700 soldiers, demolished their artillery, and indulged in their finest wines. On another occasion, Mayne adopted a less covert approach, personally leading the SAS and Royal Marines in an assault under heavy enemy machine gun fire, seizing the town of Termoli and enduring 3 days of relentless counterattacks by elite German infantry units. Once Italy was under Allied control, Mayne continued his streak of being at the center of every military operation in the Western Theater by parachuting into France to sabotage rail networks, coordinate missions with the French resistance, and destroy German communications and transportation lines, preventing the Nazis from bringing reinforcements to their units on the Normandy coast. Mayne's commander had initially warned the gung-ho lieutenant colonel that he was far too high in rank to be infiltrating deep into enemy lines. Still, Mayne persuaded his superior to let him go by pledging not to engage in any direct fire attacks. A few months later, Mayne single-handedly took Oldenburg, Germany, armed with only a Jeep and a Bren gun. Paddy was leading one SAS ahead to clear a passage for the Canadian 4th Armored Division when he received word that the convoy's lead vehicles had been ambushed. Mayne arrived at the front lines to discover that the Germans had cut off a big portion of his unit, leaving them surrounded, outnumbered, and held down by a massive force of Nazis. Mayne jumped out of the Jeep, ran into the nearest house, cleared it out with his Colt 45 pistol, snatched a Bren machine gun from a dead soldier, and dashed back to his Jeep. He ordered a soldier to man the Vickers on the back of the Jeep, and then headed straight into the midst of the ambush. Blowing through the Germans, Paddy Mayne held the wheel with one hand, while resting the Bren gun on the dash, allowing him to shoot and drive simultaneously. When Mayne arrived at the cut-off area of his unit, he had his gunner provide covering fire while he manually loaded his wounded troops into the Jeep. Once everyone was aboard, he returned his troops to friendly lines. He then reorganized his regiment and personally led an attack that flanked the German troops, annihilated their whole force, and took the town. After a long and glorious career dominating Axis powers, and somehow surviving the most hellacious environments and missions of the Second World War, Mayne retired from the SAS in 1945 and returned to civilian life as a solicitor. Sadly, Mayne passed away in 1955 in a car accident. He is the only person in the British military to have received the Distinguished Service Order 4 times. If you have made it this far into the video, then consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you haven't done so already. Thank you for watching.